I'm Dr. Sarah Roberts, 47 years old, and 3 months ago, I watched my own research team present my patented drug compound to investors as their breakthrough discovery. But what my former colleague Dr. Marcus Webb and our VP of Research did to steal credit for 15 years of my work was even worse. If you've ever had your ideas stolen at work, been pushed out of projects you created, or watched someone else get promoted for your innovations, please let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to join others who understand this kind of professional theft. Most people think biotech is all sterile labs and computer models, but the real work happens in cramped spaces that smell like ethanol and buffer solutions, where the hum of centrifuges becomes your daily soundtrack. I spent my 20s in exactly those spaces, first as a graduate student at UC San Diego studying biochemistry, then as a postdoc researcher whose hands were permanently stained with methylene blue from endless gel electrophoresis experiments. My mentor, Dr. Elena Vasquez, was the kind of scientist who could spot a contaminated culture from across the lab just by the way the media looked slightly cloudy. She taught me that breakthrough discoveries don't happen in eureka moments. They happen when you notice the third decimal place in your data doesn't match your hypothesis, and instead of dismissing it, you chase that anomaly for 6 months until it reveals something extraordinary. My first real job was at Meridian Therapeutics, a mid-sized biotech company housed in a converted warehouse in San Diego's biotech corridor. The building still had the original concrete floors and exposed ductwork, painted white to hide the fact that it used to manufacture surfboards in the 1980s. The lab benches were crowded together, separated by rolling carts loaded with pipettes and reagent bottles, and the break room had a perpetually broken coffee machine that only dispensed lukewarm brown water. But what Meridian lacked in aesthetics, it made up for in ambition. We were working on next-generation therapeutics for autoimmune diseases, and every day felt like we were racing against time to help patients whose bodies were attacking themselves. I started as a research associate, which meant I spent my days running assays, purifying proteins, and entering data into spreadsheets that never seemed to end. But I loved the puzzle of it all, designing experiments to answer questions that had never been asked before, troubleshooting protocols when they inevitably failed, and slowly building understanding one data point at a time. My supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Park, noticed that I had a knack for seeing patterns in experimental data that others missed, and she started giving me more independence to design my own studies. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior research associate, and within 5 years, I was leading my own small research team focused on developing novel immunosuppressive compounds. The breakthrough that would later define my career came in 2013, during a particularly frustrating project where we were trying to modify an existing drug to reduce its side effects. I was working late one Thursday evening, running one more variation of an experiment that had failed 12 times before, when I noticed something odd in my cell culture results. The compound we'd synthesized wasn't just reducing inflammation like we'd hoped, it was actually promoting tissue regeneration in a way we'd never seen before. I spent the weekend in the lab, running every control experiment I could think of, testing different concentrations, different cell types, different conditions. By Monday morning, I was convinced we'd stumbled onto something revolutionary, a compound that could not only suppress autoimmune responses, but actually help damaged tissues heal themselves. The next 18 months were a blur of patent applications, animal studies, and late nights in the lab trying to understand exactly how our compound worked. I named it MRD 247, after the lab room number where I'd first synthesized it. The mechanism was elegant. It blocked specific inflammatory pathways while simultaneously activating stem cell differentiation signals, essentially giving the body's natural healing processes a boost while preventing them from going haywire. The patent application alone was 47 pages long, documenting every aspect of the compound's structure, synthesis, mechanism of action, and potential therapeutic applications. I was listed as the primary inventor, with Dr. Park as co-inventor for her guidance on the initial research direction. By 2015, MRD 247 had become Meridian's most promising pipeline asset. The animal studies showed remarkable results. Mice with induced arthritis not only saw their inflammation resolve, but actually regrew cartilage that had been damaged. Primates with experimentally induced autoimmune conditions showed similar improvements, with minimal side effects even at high doses. I was promoted to principal scientist and given my own research budget to further develop the compound. Industry publications started mentioning our work, and I was invited to speak at conferences around the world. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was making a real difference, not just publishing papers or filing patents, but potentially changing the lives of millions of people with autoimmune diseases. The recognition was intoxicating. In 2016, I won the American Chemical Society's Award for Innovation in Therapeutic Chemistry. The following year, I was named to the editorial board of the Journal of Medicinal Chemistry. Meridian's stock price tripled between 2015 and 2018, largely based on investor excitement about MRD 247's potential. CEO Margaret Santos would introduce me at company meetings as our star inventor, and I started getting recruited by larger pharmaceutical companies, offering seven-figure signing bonuses. But I stayed at Meridian because I believed in our mission, and because I wanted to see MRD 247 through to clinical trials and hopefully to market. The golden period lasted until early 2019, when everything started shifting in ways I was too focused on my research to fully notice. Meridian had grown from 150 employees to over 400, and with that growth came new layers of management and corporate politics I'd never had to navigate before. The company brought in Dr. Marcus Webb as VP of Research Development, a smooth-talking executive from Big Pharma with an MBA to complement his biochemistry PhD. He had perfectly styled silver hair and wore expensive suits that looked out of place in our converted warehouse lab space, but he talked convincingly about scaling our discoveries for maximum impact and building strategic partnerships with industry leaders. At first, Webb seemed supportive of my work. He'd stop by my lab bench to ask thoughtful questions about MRD 247's mechanism of action, and he made sure I was included in high-level strategy meetings about our clinical development timeline. But I started noticing small changes that felt wrong. My research updates, which had previously been shared directly with the CEO and board of directors, now had to go through Webb's office first. New team members were assigned to my projects without my input, including Dr. David Kumar, a competitive researcher who'd been passed over for promotion at his previous company, and seemed to view every collaboration as a zero-sum game. The first real red flag came during a Tuesday morning staff meeting in October 2019. Webb was presenting our pipeline to a group of potential investors, and when he got to the slide about MRD 247, he described it as a promising compound developed by our research team. Not Dr. Roberts's breakthrough discovery, or even Sarah's compound, just our research team. When I mentioned it to him afterward, he smiled that practiced corporate smile and said, "Of course it's your discovery, Sarah. But investors like to see that we have strong teams, not just individual contributors. It's better for the company valuation." I should have trusted my instincts then, but I was too busy preparing for our Phase I clinical trial application to pay attention to office politics. I had data to analyze, protocols to write, and regulatory documents to prepare. The FDA submission for MRD 247 was due in March 2020, and everything had to be perfect. I was working 12-hour days, coming in on weekends, and barely seeing my husband and teenage daughter. The compound was my baby, and I was determined to see it succeed. That's the mindset I was in on the morning of February 18, 2020, when I arrived at the lab to find an email from Webb marked Urgent Team Restructuring. The message was corporate speak wrapped around a simple message, effective immediately. I was being transitioned off the MRD 247 project to focus on new therapeutic targets, while Dr. Kumar would be leading the clinical development phase to ensure seamless execution. The email was sent at 6:30 a.m., clearly timed to reach me after the decision had already been communicated to others. I literally read it while standing in the hallway outside my lab, my coffee growing cold in my hands as I tried to process what I was seeing. My first instinct was that there had been some mistake. I walked directly to Webb's office, but his assistant informed me he was in meetings all day and could possibly fit me in late Friday afternoon. Dr. Kumar, meanwhile, was already in my lab space, reviewing my research notebooks with two junior researchers I didn't recognize. When I approached him, he looked up with barely concealed satisfaction and said, "Oh hey Sarah. Don't worry, we'll take good care of your compound." The way he emphasized your compound made it clear he didn't think it was mine anymore. I spent the rest of that day trying to understand what was happening through official channels. I scheduled a meeting with HR Director Linda Roberts, no relation despite the shared surname, and explained that I was being removed from a project based on my own patented discovery without any explanation or justification. Linda listened with the practiced empathy of someone trained to handle employee complaints while protecting company interests. She explained that business needs sometimes require resource reallocation, and that my expertise was needed on new strategic initiatives. When I asked what strategic initiatives, she said Webb would discuss that with me once his schedule allowed. The meeting with Webb finally happened that Friday at 4:45 p.m., clearly scheduled to minimize my time and maximize his urgency to leave for the weekend. His office was on the third floor, with windows overlooking the parking lot and a view of the freeway beyond. The walls were covered with framed patents and awards from his previous positions, and his desk was cluttered with industry publications and stock reports. He gestured for me to sit in one of the uncomfortable chairs across from his desk while he remained standing, a classic power play I was too upset to appreciate at the time. "Sarah, I know this transition feels abrupt," he began, using the tone you'd use with a child who didn't understand why they couldn't have candy for dinner. "But MRD 247 is moving into a new phase that requires different expertise. Clinical development involves regulatory strategy, manufacturing partnerships, intellectual property management, areas where we need people with specific experience in bringing drugs to market." He paused, checking his phone before continuing. "Your skills are better utilized in early-stage research, where you can make the kind of breakthrough discoveries that made MRD 247 possible in the first place." I tried to stay professional, but my voice was shaking as I responded. "Marcus, I've been preparing for the clinical phase for 2 years. I wrote the initial protocols. I designed the manufacturing specifications. I know this compound better than anyone else at this company. How is removing me from the project better for Meridian, or better for patients who could benefit from this therapy?" He sighed with the practiced patience of someone who'd had this conversation before with other employees about other projects. "Sarah, I need you to trust that leadership decisions are made with the bigger picture in mind. We have investors who are expecting specific expertise and experience profiles on our key projects. Dr. Kumar has clinical development experience from Pfizer, and our manufacturing consultants specifically requested someone with his background." He glanced at his watch, making it clear the conversation was ending whether I was satisfied or not. "I'm offering you the opportunity to lead a new research initiative with substantial budget and resources. That's not a demotion, it's recognition of your discovery abilities." As I left his office that evening, walking past labs that were already dark and parking lots that were nearly empty, I realized I was facing a choice that would define the rest of my career. I could accept this lateral move and hope that future discoveries would be treated with more respect, or I could fight for what was rightfully mine and risk being labeled as difficult, litigious, or unable to be a team player. The pharmaceutical industry is smaller than people realize, and reputations follow you from company to company. That weekend, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of research. I called in sick on Monday and spent the day consulting with an intellectual property attorney. Janet Morrison's office was in a glass tower downtown, far from the converted warehouses and industrial parks where biotech companies typically operated. She specialized in patent disputes and had handled several cases involving researchers whose discoveries had been appropriated by their employers. Her questions were direct and uncomfortable. Did I have documentation proving my role in developing MRD 247? Were there witnesses to my contributions? Had I signed any agreements that might limit my rights to the invention? The answers were both reassuring and terrifying. The patent clearly listed me as primary inventor, and I had lab notebooks documenting every step of the discovery and development process. But I'd also signed standard employment agreements that gave Meridian ownership of any inventions made using company resources, and challenging them would mean accusing my employer of acting in bad faith, career suicide in an industry where everyone knew everyone else. I returned to work on Tuesday to find that my access to MRD 247 project files had been revoked. My lab notebooks had been transferred to centralized storage for regulatory compliance, and my nameplate had been removed from the lab door I'd occupied for 3 years. Dr. Kumar was now listed as principal investigator on the project, with my former research assistants reporting directly to him. It was a professional erasure so complete and efficient that I wondered how many times Webb had orchestrated similar transitions. The new project Webb offered me was developing early-stage compounds for rare neurological diseases. Important work, but starting from zero with no existing intellectual property, no established timelines, and no guarantee of success. My research budget was substantial, as promised, but it felt like consolation money. I was being paid well to disappear quietly from the project that had defined my career, while other people prepared to take credit for bringing my discovery to patients who desperately needed it. The first escalating incident happened 3 weeks later, during a company-wide presentation where Webb was updating the board of directors on our clinical pipeline. I was sitting in the back of the auditorium, technically invited but clearly not expected to contribute. When Webb reached the slide about MRD 247, he spent 15 minutes discussing our innovative approach to autoimmune therapy and the brilliant work our research team had done to identify this promising compound. Dr. Kumar was featured prominently, discussing his plans for clinical trial design and regulatory strategy. My name was mentioned once, in the context of previous research contributions that had laid the groundwork for our current development efforts. Previous research contributions, as if my discovery was ancient history rather than the foundation of everything they were presenting. When the presentation ended and board members were asking questions about timelines and market potential, I watched Dr. Kumar field technical questions about mechanisms of action that I could have answered in my sleep, because I'd discovered them. After the meeting, I approached Dr. Kumar directly, something I'd been avoiding for weeks. David, I'd like to stay involved in the clinical development planning. I know this compound better than anyone, and I think my input could be valuable as you design the Phase I protocols. He looked around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation before responding with words that were obviously scripted. Sarah, I appreciate your interest, but we have a very specific regulatory strategy that was developed with our external consultants. Having too many voices in the clinical development process can create confusion and delays that we can't afford with investor timelines. He paused, then delivered what felt like a practiced blow. I'm sure you understand that clinical development is different from discovery research. It's more about execution and compliance than creativity and innovation. The dismissal was so patronizing that I felt my face flush with anger. I'd published 43 peer-reviewed papers, held 12 patents, and had been working in drug development for longer than Kumar had been out of graduate school. But I was being talked to like a graduate student who didn't understand how the real world worked. I walked away from that conversation, knowing that any attempt to remain involved in MRD 247's development would be actively resisted, and that my reputation was being systematically undermined by people who needed me to be irrelevant for their version of events to make sense. The second escalation came 6 weeks later, when I discovered that my former research assistants were being instructed not to discuss MRD 247 with me, even in casual conversation. Maria Santos, who had worked with me for 3 years, and had literally been in the lab the night I first noticed the compound's regenerative effects, approached me awkwardly after a department meeting. Dr. Roberts, I wanted you to know that Dr. Kumar told our team that we shouldn't discuss the clinical project with anyone not directly involved, including former team members. He said it was for intellectual property protection. She looked miserable delivering this message, clearly understanding the absurdity of preventing me from discussing my own discovery. I'm sorry, I know how wrong this is, but I can't afford to lose my job. I realized then that my isolation was being systematically engineered. By restricting information flow and reframing my expertise as irrelevant to current needs, Webb and Kumar were creating a narrative where my continued interest in MRD 247 looked like inappropriate meddling rather than legitimate concern for my own intellectual property. They were essentially gaslighting me on an institutional level, using corporate policies and hierarchical authority to make me question my own role in the discovery that had made their careers possible. The third escalation was discovering that Webb was actively undermining my reputation with external collaborators. I learned this during a conference call with researchers at UC San Francisco, who had been interested in collaborating on MRD 247 related projects. Dr. Patricia Wong, whom I'd known for years through professional societies, mentioned almost casually that she'd heard I was no longer involved in the MRD 247 development, and that Webb had suggested they work directly with Kumar for any future collaborations. "I was surprised to hear that, Sarah," she said carefully, clearly trying to understand the politics without getting involved in them. "When Marcus called last month, he made it sound like you'd moved on to other priorities and weren't interested in continuing with MRD 247 projects. That didn't sound like the Sarah Roberts I know, who used to talk about that compound like it was her third child." The realization that Webb was actively managing my professional relationships behind my back was devastating. He wasn't just removing me from internal projects. He was systematically severing the external collaborations and industry connections that had taken me years to build. Every phone call I didn't receive, every collaboration invitation that went to Kumar instead of me, every conference presentation slot that went to someone else, was part of a deliberate strategy to erase my professional identity as the inventor of MRD 247. When I confronted Webb about this during our next quarterly review meeting, his response was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. "Sarah, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of business development. Companies need consistent points of contact for external collaborations, and it would be confusing for our partners to work with multiple people on the same project. Dr. Kumar is the project lead now, so naturally he's the appropriate contact for MRD 247 related discussions." He leaned back in his chair with that practiced executive confidence, clearly feeling like he'd delivered a reasonable explanation for unreasonable behavior. "I'm concerned that you're having difficulty letting go of this project. It's natural to feel attached to your discoveries, but successful scientists need to be able to transition between projects as business needs evolve. I'd hate to see your career progression stalled because you're too focused on past achievements instead of future opportunities." The threat was wrapped in concern, but it was unmistakable. Accept the new reality quietly, or face consequences for being difficult to manage and unable to adapt to changing business needs. I left that meeting knowing that Webb had essentially declared war on my career, and that fighting back would require evidence, strategy, and legal support that could destroy my reputation even if I won. The fourth and final escalation pushed me past the point of quiet compliance. It happened when I discovered that Kumar and Webb were preparing to present MRD 247 data at the International Conference on Autoimmune Therapeutics, the most prestigious venue in our field, without any mention of my role in the discovery. I found out because the conference organizers sent me the abstract submission confirmation, apparently not realizing that I was no longer involved in the project. The abstract was listed under Kumar's name as presenting author, with Webb as senior author, and described MRD 247 as a novel therapeutic compound developed through innovative team-based drug discovery approaches. My name didn't appear anywhere in the author list, acknowledgements, or funding credits. 15 years of work, billions of dollars in potential revenue, thousands of future patients who could benefit from the therapy, all of it attributed to other people as if I'd never existed. I printed out the abstract and walked directly to Webb's office without an appointment. His assistant tried to stop me, but I was beyond caring about corporate protocols and professional politeness. I placed the paper on his desk and asked a simple question. "How do you plan to explain to the scientific community that David Kumar discovered a compound that I patented 3 years before he joined this company?" Webb glanced at the abstract, then looked at me with something approaching pity. "Sarah, conference presentations represent current project leadership, not historical contributions. David is leading the clinical development, so it's appropriate for him to present the current status of our research. This is standard practice in pharmaceutical development. Standard practice is acknowledging the work of previous researchers, even when project leadership changes. Every presentation about penicillin doesn't just credit the current users, it acknowledges Fleming's original discovery. You're not just changing leadership, you're rewriting history. My voice was getting louder, and I could see Webb's assistant hovering nearby, clearly ready to call security if necessary. I think you're being dramatic, Sarah. No one is denying your contributions to early-stage research. But drug development is a team effort that involves hundreds of people over many years. We can't acknowledge every person who touched a project in every presentation. He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I strongly suggest you focus on your current responsibilities instead of relitigating past projects. This kind of behavior isn't helping your reputation or your career prospects. As I left his office for what I knew would be the last time as an employee, I realized that Webb had made a critical miscalculation. He'd been so focused on erasing my connection to MRD 247 that he'd forgotten something crucial. I still held the primary patent, and my name was on every legal document establishing ownership of the intellectual property. He could control presentations and project leadership, but he couldn't change the fundamental legal reality that I was the inventor of record for the compound his entire strategy depended on. That evening, I called Janet Morrison and told her I was ready to fight. Not just for credit or recognition, but to prevent the systematic theft of intellectual property that was becoming standard practice in corporate research environments. Webb had pushed too far, and it was time to remind him that legal ownership of intellectual property couldn't be reassigned through office politics and corporate hierarchy. The climax confrontation happened 3 months later, in the sterile conference room on the 4th floor of Meridian's headquarters building. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the biotech corridor, white walls lined with monitors displaying stock prices and project timelines, and a polished table that could seat 20 people. Today it held 8. Webb and Kumar, representing Meridian's research division, CEO Margaret Santos, and General Counsel Robert Kim representing corporate leadership, Janet Morrison, and intellectual property specialist David Park representing my interests, and a court reporter whose presence made everything feel official and irreversible. The meeting had been requested by Meridian's legal team after my attorney filed a formal dispute over intellectual property attribution and inventor rights related to MRD 247. For 3 months, lawyers had exchanged letters, documents, and increasingly aggressive demands, but Webb had apparently convinced company leadership that my claims were baseless and that a simple meeting would resolve everything in their favor. He'd underestimated both the strength of my legal position and my willingness to pursue it publicly. Webb opened the meeting with corporate confidence, wearing his most expensive suit and speaking in the measured tones of someone accustomed to winning these battles. Thank you all for being here. I think we can resolve this situation quickly once Dr. Roberts understands the legal and business realities of pharmaceutical development. While we certainly appreciate Sarah's early contributions to this project, the current dispute seems to stem from misunderstandings about how intellectual property rights work in corporate research environments. He gestured toward a stack of documents his legal team had prepared. As these employment agreements clearly demonstrate, any inventions made using company resources belong to the company, regardless of individual contributions. Dr. Roberts was compensated fairly for her research work, and she continues to be employed in a senior scientific position. Her current claims seem to be based on emotional attachment to a project rather than legal ownership rights. Santos nodded supportively, clearly having been briefed to expect a quick resolution in the company's favor. Kumar sat silently, looking increasingly uncomfortable, as he realized this wasn't going to be the simple dismissal of a disgruntled employee that Webb had promised. My attorney let Webb finish his opening statement before responding with the calm professionalism of someone who'd spent 3 months building an airtight case. Mr. Webb, thank you for that perspective. However, I think you're misunderstanding both the legal framework governing inventor rights and the specific facts of this case. She opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder of documents. While it's true that companies typically own intellectual property developed by employees, federal patent law specifically requires that inventors be properly credited regardless of ownership arrangements. Dr. Roberts isn't claiming ownership of the patent, she's asserting her right to be recognized as the inventor, which cannot be transferred or reassigned. She placed the first document on the table. The original patent application, with my name clearly listed as primary inventor, and detailed descriptions of every aspect of MRD 247's discovery and development. This patent was filed in 2014, based on Dr. Roberts' discovery in 2013, and was granted in 2016. Dr. Kumar joined Meridian Therapeutics in 2019, making it impossible for him to have contributed to the original invention. Yet current company communications consistently credit him as the discoverer of this compound. Webb's confident expression began to crack as Janet continued. More concerning are the systematic efforts to exclude Dr. Roberts from her own invention, and to present other researchers as the source of discoveries they legally cannot have made. This isn't a dispute over project management or research credit. This is potential patent fraud that could invalidate Meridian's intellectual property rights and expose the company to federal criminal charges. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Santos leaned forward, clearly realizing this wasn't the simple employee complaint she'd been prepared for. Janet, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. Marcus has been clear that we're not trying to deny Dr. Roberts' contributions, just manage project leadership in a way that serves our business interests. Janet smiled politely and placed a second set of documents on the table. Margaret, I have copies of internal emails, presentation materials, and conference abstracts from the past 6 months. In every case, Dr. Kumar is credited as the discoverer or lead developer of MRD 247, with no mention of Dr. Roberts' role. This isn't project management, this is systematic misattribution of inventorship, which violates both federal patent law and Meridian's own intellectual property policies. She opened to a page highlighting one particularly damaging email exchange between Webb and Kumar. In this message from Dr. Webb to Dr. Kumar, dated March 15, Dr. Webb explicitly instructs him to take credit for the discovery process and to avoid referencing previous research that might confuse investors about current leadership. This isn't reassigning project management, this is deliberately falsifying the historical record of invention. Kumar had gone pale, clearly recognizing his own words in the email chain. Webb was frantically whispering with General Counsel Kim, who looked like he was calculating the potential legal liability of the situation they'd stumbled into. I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness, watching people I'd worked with for years realize that their attempt to erase my contributions had been documented in corporate communications that could destroy their careers. Janet wasn't finished. She placed a third set of documents on the table. Witness statements from current and former Meridian employees, who had worked with me during MRD 247's discovery and development. These sworn statements from Dr. Jennifer Park, Dr. Elena Vasquez, Maria Santos, and 6 other researchers provide detailed accounts of Dr. Roberts' role in discovering, developing, and characterizing MRD 247. They contradict every aspect of the narrative that Dr. Webb and Dr. Kumar have been promoting. She turned to a highlighted section of Dr. Park's statement. Dr. Park specifically describes being present when Dr. Roberts first observed the compound's regenerative effects, and she details Dr. Roberts' 18-month process of characterizing the mechanism of action. She also describes her own role as co-inventor, which has similarly been erased from recent company communications. Santos was now looking directly at Webb, with the expression of someone realizing they'd been misled about a situation that could cost millions in legal fees and damage the company's reputation. Marcus, you assured me this was a personnel management issue, not a legal dispute over patent rights. These documents suggest something very different. Webb tried to maintain his composure, but his corporate confidence was rapidly deteriorating. "Margaret, I think Dr. Roberts's attorney is presenting a very one-sided view of normal business practices. Research attribution in pharmaceutical companies is complex, and current project leadership appropriately reflects who's responsible for bringing discoveries to market." That's when I finally spoke, my voice steady despite months of anger and frustration. "Marcus, there's nothing complex about lying. You've spent 6 months telling investors, collaborators, and conference organizers that David Kumar discovered MRD 247, when you know that's impossible, because he didn't work here when I made the discovery. You've removed my name from presentations, excluded me from collaborations, and instructed my former team not to discuss the project with me, all to support a false narrative that serves your political interests." I leaned forward, making eye contact with each person around the table. "I don't care about project management or corporate hierarchies. I care about scientific integrity and the legal requirement that inventors be properly credited for their work. You can reassign project leadership, but you cannot reassign history, and you cannot commit patent fraud to make your management decisions look more legitimate." The smoking gun came when Janet produced her final piece of evidence, a recording of Webb's conversation with a potential industry partner, where he explicitly claimed that Kumar had invented the breakthrough compound that's driving our pipeline. The recording was legal, made by the partner during a routine business call that both parties knew was being recorded for compliance purposes. Webb's voice was unmistakable. "David Kumar is one of our star inventors. The MRD 247 compound is really his baby. He's been working on autoimmune therapeutics for his entire career, and this discovery represents the culmination of his research expertise. We're lucky to have someone with his track record leading our most promising project." The silence that followed was devastating. Webb had been caught in a direct lie, claiming Kumar had invented a compound that predated his employment by 6 years. Santos was staring at Webb like she'd never seen him before, while Kumar looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. General Counsel Kim was frantically taking notes, clearly trying to assess the legal exposure of what they'd just heard. Janet closed her folder with quiet satisfaction. Federal patent law is very clear about the consequences of knowingly misrepresenting inventorship. Companies that systematically falsify invention records can face criminal charges, civil penalties, and invalidation of their intellectual property rights. Individuals who participate in patent fraud can face personal criminal liability and permanent exclusion from federal research funding. She looked directly at Webb. "Dr. Roberts isn't seeking monetary damages or ownership rights she doesn't already possess. She's simply asking that Meridian comply with federal law by properly crediting inventors for their work. That means acknowledging her role as primary inventor of MRD 247 in all communications, presentations, and legal documents, and ensuring that future attributions accurately reflect the historical record of discovery." Santos finally spoke, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Marcus, is there any part of this that Dr. Morrison has misrepresented? Did Dr. Roberts invent MRD 247 before Dr. Kumar joined our company?" Webb's corporate facade finally cracked completely. He looked around the room like a trapped animal, clearly realizing that his entire strategy had collapsed in less than an hour. "Margaret, the situation is more complex than it appears. Research attribution isn't always straightforward, and business needs sometimes require emphasis on current capabilities rather than historical contributions." It was a non-answer that confirmed everything my attorney had presented, delivered by someone who'd lost all credibility to claim misunderstanding or good faith. The meeting ended with a clear ultimatum. Meridian had 30 days to correct all public records, presentations, and communications to properly credit me as the inventor of MRD 247, or face a federal lawsuit for patent fraud that would be prosecuted publicly and could result in criminal charges for individuals involved in the misrepresentation. Webb was suspended pending an internal investigation, Kumar was removed from the MRD 247 project, and I was formally reinstated as principal scientist with full access to all research related to my discovery. Walking out of that conference room, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and vindication that was hard to describe. I'd won a battle that never should have been necessary, proving ownership of intellectual property that was legally mine from the beginning. But the victory felt hollow, because it had required 3 months of legal warfare to establish basic facts that everyone in the room had always known were true. The immediate aftermath was swift and decisive. Webb's suspension became termination within a week, once the internal investigation revealed a pattern of similar attribution manipulation involving other researchers' work. Kumar was reassigned to early-stage research projects and quietly began updating his resume for positions at other companies. Santos issued a company-wide memo acknowledging procedural errors in research attribution and establishing new policies to ensure proper crediting of inventors in all communications. The industry response was more complex. Some colleagues reached out privately to express support and share their own stories of intellectual property appropriation, while others seemed to view my legal action as unnecessarily aggressive or damaging to collaborative research environments. Several conference organizers retroactively corrected presentations and publications to properly credit my work, but the damage to professional relationships was harder to repair than the damage to historical records. 6 months later, MRD 247 entered Phase 1 clinical trials with me formally listed as principal investigator and primary inventor. The trial enrolled its first patients in September 2020, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, which actually helped recruitment because patients with autoimmune diseases were particularly vulnerable to viral infections and eager for treatments that could help their conditions without further compromising their immune systems. The early results were everything I'd hoped for when I first noticed that compound's unusual effects 7 years earlier. Patients with rheumatoid arthritis saw significant improvements in joint inflammation and pain, with some showing actual cartilage regeneration on follow-up imaging. The safety profile was clean, no serious adverse events related to the compound, and the predicted tissue regeneration effects were confirmed in multiple patients. By early 2021, Meridian's stock price had doubled based on the Phase 1 results, and we were preparing for a much larger Phase 2 trial designed to confirm efficacy across multiple autoimmune conditions. Industry publications were calling MRD 247 a potential breakthrough therapy, and patient advocacy groups were lobbying for accelerated approval pathways. The compound I'd discovered in a converted warehouse lab was becoming the kind of medical advance that could change how we treat autoimmune diseases. More importantly, the public attention around MRD 247's development had sparked broader conversations about intellectual property attribution in corporate research environments. Several scientific societies updated their ethics guidelines to require proper inventor crediting, and the Patent Office began more aggressive enforcement of inventorship requirements in pharmaceutical applications. The personal healing took longer than the professional vindication. For months after the legal resolution, I found myself constantly documenting my work, taking screenshots of emails and recording important conversations, behaviors that felt necessary but paranoid. Trust in corporate structures and collaborative research had been damaged in ways that formal apologies and policy changes couldn't immediately repair. My relationship with my research team evolved as well. Some colleagues who had remained silent during the attribution dispute began sharing their own experiences with intellectual property theft and corporate gaslighting. Others maintained professional distance, either because they disagreed with my decision to pursue legal action or because they feared being associated with someone who challenged company authority successfully. The most unexpected outcome was discovering how common these experiences were among women and minority researchers in biotechnology. Within weeks of my story becoming public, I was contacted by dozens of scientists who had faced similar attempts to minimize their contributions or transfer credit for their discoveries to colleagues with more traditional demographic profiles or corporate connections. A year later, I was invited to speak at the National Academy of Sciences about intellectual property protection for academic and corporate researchers. Standing at that podium, addressing an audience of the most respected scientists in the country, I realized that my fight over MRD 247 had become something larger than personal vindication. It had become a case study in how systematic bias operates in scientific institutions and what legal protections exist for researchers whose contributions are deliberately erased. The speech felt like the culmination of a journey that had started with a simple observation in a late-night experiment and evolved into a public confrontation with institutional power structures that routinely appropriate women's work. I talked about the scientific process that led to MRD 247's discovery, but I also talked about the corporate processes that had been used to erase my role in that discovery, and the legal processes that had been necessary to restore historical accuracy. Today, MRD 247 is in Phase 3 trials across multiple sites in North America and Europe, with preliminary results suggesting it will likely receive FDA approval for rheumatoid arthritis and potentially several other autoimmune conditions. The compound that I discovered in 2013 could be available to patients as early as 2025, representing a 12-year journey from initial observation to approved therapy. The financial impact has been substantial. Meridian's market capitalization now exceeds $3 billion, largely based on MRD 247's potential revenue, and licensing deals with international partners have generated hundreds of millions in upfront payments. But the personal satisfaction comes from knowing that my discovery will actually help people whose lives have been limited by autoimmune diseases that destroy joints, organs, and quality of life. The professional recognition has been gratifying as well. In 2022, I received the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences Award for Scientific Integrity, specifically for defending the principles of proper attribution and inventor rights in corporate research environments. The following year, I was elected to the National Academy of Engineering, with a citation that mentioned both my contributions to therapeutic chemistry and my advocacy for intellectual property protection in collaborative research. But the most meaningful recognition has come from other researchers who have contacted me to say that my story gave them courage to challenge their own experiences with intellectual property appropriation. Knowing that my legal battle has helped establish precedents that protect other inventors' rights feels more important than any individual award or professional achievement. Looking back on this experience, I've learned that scientific discovery is only the beginning of a much longer process that involves not just technical innovation but also institutional politics, legal frameworks, and power structures that can either support or undermine the people whose work makes medical breakthroughs possible. The molecules don't care about corporate hierarchies or gender bias, but the systems that translate discoveries into therapies are shaped by human decisions that can either honor or erase the contributions of the people who make them possible. If you're working in a corporate research environment, particularly in biotechnology or pharmaceuticals, document everything. Keep detailed lab notebooks, save emails, and maintain records of your contributions to collaborative projects. Intellectual property law provides strong protections for inventors, but only if you can prove your role in the discovery process. Don't assume that good work speaks for itself or that institutional fairness will protect your interests. Prepare for the possibility that you might need to defend your contributions legally. Pay attention to early warning signs of attribution manipulation, changes in project communications that minimize your role, exclusion from meetings about work you initiated, reassignment of collaborators without explanation, or pressure to let others present your work for business reasons. These patterns often escalate systematically, and early intervention is more effective than trying to correct historical records after months or years of misattribution. Build alliances with colleagues who value scientific integrity over corporate politics. The most valuable support during my legal battle came from other researchers who were willing to provide honest testimony about my contributions, even when doing so created potential workplace tensions. Cultivate relationships with people who will prioritize accuracy over convenience when attribution questions arise. Don't let fear of retaliation prevent you from defending your intellectual property rights. The biotechnology industry is small, but it's also dependent on innovation, and researchers who make genuine breakthroughs will find opportunities even if they challenge unfair treatment at their current positions. Your reputation for scientific integrity is more valuable than your reputation for being easy to manage. Most importantly, remember that intellectual property theft isn't just a personal injury, it's a threat to the scientific enterprise that depends on proper attribution to function effectively. When researchers' contributions are systematically misrepresented, it undermines the incentive structures that drive innovation and the collaborative relationships that make breakthrough discoveries possible. The pharmaceutical industry needs more researchers who are willing to challenge attribution manipulation and defend the principle that credit should follow contribution regardless of corporate politics or demographic factors. Your willingness to stand up for your own work creates precedents and protections that benefit everyone working in collaborative research environments. If you've experienced intellectual property appropriation in your own career, please share your story in the comments. The more we document these patterns, the easier it becomes to recognize and prevent them. If you're currently facing attribution challenges, know that legal protections exist, and that challenging institutional unfairness isn't career suicide, it's career protection that establishes your reputation as someone whose contributions are documented, defended, and legally protected. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about navigating workplace challenges in research environments, protecting your professional interests, and building careers that balance scientific integrity with institutional success. The next video will feature Dr. Jennifer Park discussing her experiences as a co-inventor who was also erased from MRD 247's attribution and how we've worked together to establish new policies that protect collaborative research relationships while ensuring proper crediting of individual contributions. Remember, your discoveries belong to you, even when your employer owns the patents. Don't let anyone convince you that defending your intellectual property rights is unprofessional or unnecessary. The future of scientific innovation depends on researchers who are willing to challenge the systems that attempt to erase their contributions, and who insist that credit should follow contribution, regardless of convenience, politics, or prejudice.